What's going on, everybody, and welcome into this crossover Thursday edition of Locked On Rams and Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering the Los Angeles Rams and the New Orleans Saints, getting you ready for this big Thursday night matchup. We are your hosts, Travis Rogers at Travis Rogers on whatever social media you're using these days. Myself, Ross Jackson at Ross Jackson Nola on your favorite social media as well. Today, we're going to be breaking down what it is that each of these teams needs to do to get a win, what each of these teams kind of going to be defined by when it comes to the big time matchup, starting, of course, with the two head coaches. Big focuses on either side of the ball. They're going to be the ones to set the tone for this matchup. And to kick us all off, of course, we'll look at the biggest stories for the Los Angeles Rams and the New Orleans Saints as well. Thank you so much for being an everydayer and checking out Locked On Rams and Locked On Saints here as a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Appreciate you very much being here with us. In today's episode of this crossover Thursday is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. So go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use the promo code in all lowercase LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Travis, always a pleasure to be here with you. Very different tone this time around than when we talked last year, right? These two teams duking it out 7-7, both of them looking for a playoff spot. What's the biggest story for the Rams coming into this one?
Well, let's just start right here, Ross. You and I were talking when the schedules came out and we saw that we had each other on a Thursday night. And we're like, okay, a little primetime action. And I think we were both thinking, I don't know if we're going to make it that far, right? They punch this one out. But here we are, like you just said, a couple of teams that are 7-7. I think both of these teams a surprising 7-7. Mm-hmm. And I think that the biggest surprise for me, and I think that the reason that I'm excited about what's coming up on Thursday night for the Rams, and the reason that they're in the position that they're in, they found a running back.
They did.
And Kiron Williams was another one of these guys that the Rams have found late in the draft. He was a 5th-round draft pick a year ago. He really didn't play last year. He got hurt on the very first play of the season, on the opening kickoff. He gets hurt. He misses the vast majority of the season. He comes back towards the end. By that point, the Rams season was kind of up in flames. So it really, there wasn't a lot of great information to kind of glean from that. But when they finally moved on from Cam Akers, gave him an opportunity. He killed it right out of the gate. And then he got hurt. And then he was gone for 4 weeks, and the Rams kind of spiraled, and they never really got it back together until he came back. And then all of a sudden he's back. And since he's been back, Matthew Stafford has gotten better. Cooper Kupp has gotten better. The tight ends have gotten involved more. And it's all because Kiron Williams has been not good, but very, very good. And that offense of Sean McVay's, when you have a running back that can run the way that he can, it's a real deal.
Yeah, Locked On Saints every day is you're going to know and feel a lot of familiarity in that this Rams team builds a lot of what it does off of the run game. They've gotten a little bit more physical here recently. I know that was a big goal of Sean McVay's, and Kiron Williams has definitely helped them do that. I'll introduce a little bit of finesse too. It's always nice when you can kind of strike gold in the 5th round on a running back, right?
Well, 5th round in a running back last year, 5th round in a wide receiver this year with Tua. I mean, the Rams top of the draft. Well, there hasn't been a top of the draft since
F them picks.
They haven't really had any picks. F them picks is right. But even the guys that they have taken in the Tutu Atwell 2nd-round pick hasn't really worked out. Logan Bruss, a 2nd-round pick just a couple of years ago. He's on a practice squad. He barely even made the team this year. But those guys later on in the draft, Nakua, and obviously Kyren Williams. You've got guys like Byron Young and Kobe Turner that were 3rd-round picks. You got Ethan Evans, who's a starting punter on this team now. They drafted him in the 7th round. They found 5 starters in one draft without a 1st-round draft pick. It's pretty darn good.
Yeah, man, that's a dream come true right there. I don't know how many I can't remember how many draft picks they had, but all told, how many was it?
14.
Yeah, you have 14. You probably, if you get 3 out of that, you're pretty stoked about it. You know what I mean? Like that's pretty incredible. So a wild draft for them. And look, it's exciting to see where the Rams are. And I think on the Saints side of it, talking about the biggest story for them, it's all about, can they control their destiny, continue to control their destiny in an opportunity where many people don't expect that they'll be able to, and didn't expect that they would even be in this position anymore. It's really interesting. The Rams at 7-7. It's a surprising 7-7 because everybody expected less from the Rams.
Sure.
And now here they are doing a lot more. The New Orleans Saints at a 7-7. It's a surprising 7-7 because it's almost a disappointing 7-7 because people thought it would be a lot more. It's interesting how those sort of preseason expectations and the hype and all that other stuff completely shades how we're talking about these two teams 14 games in. The Saints are in the same position with some pretty good draft picks themselves. Guy they got in the first round in Brian Brzee, guy they got in the fifth round in safety Jordan Howden, who's now starting for them with Marcus Mayow. And then another guy, A.T. Perry, the wide receiver out of Wake Forest that they got in the sixth round. Three pretty solid guys, and everyone's disappointed in the fact that the Saints got 3 out of what, 7 in the draft class, half the amount. So it's entirely different in terms of how these two teams are being looked at. But a lot of it just comes down to those preseason expectations. And the expectations were really high here in New Orleans. The expectations of the New Orleans Saints themselves were really high. And it's only really been over the course of the last 2 weeks that they've really started to realize those high expectations. The issue is that it was against the Carolina Panthers and the New York Giants. Yeah. And so now they get a real opportunity here on Thursday Night Football, not just in front of their own fans, not just in front of Rams fans, but in front of the entire world that's going to be watching to see if they can really, really establish something that they've never been able to establish over the course of the past 2 seasons. That's momentum and, heaven's sake, a win streak, right? So here's an opportunity for them to do that and keep their hopes and dreams alive for the postseason.
Yeah, you're so right. There, I've been covering the Rams as their pre-half and post-game show host since they came back to LA. This is the 8th season that they've been here in LA. And you would think that I would have kind of wrapped my head around this by then. You would think I would have wrapped my head around this watching NFL football for the last 40 years or so. No one knows anything. No one knows anything coming into these seasons. That if we think there are 10 teams that are going to be good, maybe half will. If there are 10 teams that we think are going to be terrible, maybe half of those might actually be pretty good. We don't know. Sean McVay doesn't know. The NFL doesn't know, right? You do what you get. You go week to week. You try to find a little bit of momentum like you're talking about. The Rams couldn't put 2 games together all season long until they came out of their bye and they won 3 in a row. They're going to probably have to win 3 in a row again if they're going to get back to the playoffs. They beat the Commanders last week. They need to beat the Saints on Thursday night, and they need to go into New York and beat the Giants on New Year's Eve to get that 9th win. And that still may not be enough, depending on what Seattle does in behind them, what Minnesota does, what Green Bay does. This is a team that could not get out of their own way, 3-6. And yet here you are asking them to win 6 out of 7, which seemed absurd coming out of their bye. And they're 2 games away from doing it.
Yeah, it's such an interesting spot, man. But we're happy about it, right? Like, here we go. We get to have the fun now of talking about the positive vibes in LA, the positive vibes in the other LA. Whichever one applies is the other LA for you individually. It's okay. It can be both. And so I'm very much looking forward to seeing how this game plays out. Obviously, these two teams have a big time history. Used to be division rivals. Things got a lot more interesting just a few years ago. We don't have to go down that road. And even last year, like the game between the if you look at the NFL's Twitter account or whatever, they tweeted like all of the highlights from that game. One.
Sure.
And just left that out entirely. They just went straight from the big catch by Ted Ginn Jr. down the right sideline to Will Lutz kicking a field goal. And it was okay.
Bang play. Impossible to tell what was happening.
What a wild situation. I will say that no matter what, how badly the Rams were expected to play versus how good they've been, how good the Saints were expected to play versus how bad they've been, and then how good maybe they're turning out to be. The one thing that has never gotten any better is NFL officiating. Like they have been a mess all season. So absolutely. Hopefully they're not about to determine anything going on in this game, because there's enough to watch out for in this game. And it's going to start at the coaches for me. Big time matchup between a defensive head coach in Dennis Allen and an offensive head coach in Sean McVay. How that matchup impacts this game, we're going to be breaking that down and much more as we get to matchups here to continue on with our crossover Thursday, Locked On Rams and Locked On Saints here as a part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Rams and Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook and the official sports betting partner here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Travis, the Saints 4.5-point underdogs traveling to Los Angeles. The Rams 4.5-point favorites. That's kind of a nice little line if you're a first-time user over at FanDuel, right? Because right now, if you're a first-time user, you're going to be able to get $150 in bonus bets by simply winning a $5 money line bet. So if you like Travis and the Rams, right? I'm putting it on you, Travis. If they like you, they can put $5 down on the Rams. And if you win that, you get the winnings from winning that bet, of course, but also $150 in bonus bets just because your team won. That's like immediate 30-1 odds. So go and check them out today, because then you can use that for over-unders, props, prop bets, spreads, a whole bunch of other stuff. And of course, same game parlays that make it super fun and super easy to win a ton of money. So go check them out today over at FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right, everybody, continuing on. We appreciate all you everydayers out there making Locked On Rams and Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Travis Rogers, pre-half and post, and of course over at ESPN LA 710 every single day. Myself, Ross Jackson, here with the Locked On Saints podcast, Saints News Network, Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation site covering the New Orleans Saints, breaking down this big old matchup here that we didn't know was going to be a big old Thursday night matchup. We just didn't know.
Right.
And now here we are. And speaking of matchups, Travis, for me, I don't know about you, but the biggest matchup for me in this game comes down to Dennis Allen, the defensive-minded head coach of the New Orleans Saints, whose defense just popped off against the New York Giants, going up against the whiz kid, who's not a kid anymore, right? The whiz guy, if you will.
Craziest part, Ross, he's in his 7th year as the coach of the Rams. He's still the youngest coach in the league.
That's incredible. All right. He's a very experienced whiz kid. Sean McVay and that incredible offensive system over in Los Angeles, which is not the same offensive system that it was when he started. And it's not the same offensive system that it was when they came to New Orleans just a year ago. He's continued to evolve it. For me, Travis, that's the biggest matchup in this game.
Yeah, it's funny, Ross, that Sean McVay was talking about this, and I think that Rams fans will certainly relate to this, and the everydayers who have heard me say this a lot over the course of not just this season, but I really do think it's one of the few things that is fair to criticize Sean McVay about during his tenure as a Rams coach. And there's not much. I mean, there's been a lot of winning. There's been a Super Bowl championship. He wants to throw the ball first, second, 10th, 50th, 100th, that he does not want to commit to running the football. And he was talking about that, and especially inside the 10-yard line, that they get pass happy. You saw, I don't know if you got a chance to see the game against the Baltimore Ravens. They opened the game with 9 consecutive runs. Kiron Williams is just hammering people. They walk right down the field on one of the best defenses in the league. They get to the 7-yard line. They throw it 3 times incomplete, and they kick a field goal. And everybody
should sound familiar to Saints fans, by the way. Should sound familiar.
There you go. So I think it's Sean McVay against Dennis Allen, like you're talking about, but with Sean McVay almost against himself. That don't get too cute. Don't get like there's out here in LA. Obviously, the Chargers are a topic of conversation occasionally as well. But Brandon Staley had this
something happened with him,
right? Brandon Staley says that I'm going to do it my way no matter what. Sean McVay is, I'm going to do it my way no matter what, until I'm sure that doesn't work. So I think we're to the point where he's using Kiron Williams in an incredibly effective way. I think we're going to see him a little bit more, but what I would really like to see him commit to is using him more inside the red zone, and in particular, inside the 10-yard line. Let's keep running the ball when we get it down there. There's going to be plenty of opportunities for Matthew Stafford. I hope that Sean McVay doesn't do that. I'm an offensive guy. I like to throw it. Let's just go across that big fat white line and get 6 points.
Yeah, the red zone woes are something that I think impact both of these teams to where when they perform in the red zone, they win. When they don't perform in the red zone, they lose, right? Like that's such a telling factor of their ability, both of these teams' abilities to put points on the board. The thing that I think you look at when it comes to Dennis Allen is, can he dial up the pressure that's going to impact Matthew Stafford when they do go to throw the football? And can they, on the offensive side, end up getting enough of a lead to kind of eliminate the run game as an option for Los Angeles? Now, that's going to be tough. The Saints have not scored a opening drive touchdown all season. so far. And this happened last year too. They scored one in like week 7, the first one, and they didn't score their next one until week 15. But then they kind of went on a I'll call it a tear, right? But it was at the end of the season, so what does it really matter?
Right.
Where they started putting them together. Can the Saints put them together when it matters this season? And so looking at kind of where Dennis Allen is, the one thing that I will credit Dennis Allen with, or one of the things that I'll credit him with over on the defensive side, all the people who want to ask questions about him being a head coach are going to ask that questions, but nobody are going to ask those questions, but nobody's asked the question about whether or not he orchestrates a good defense. Mm-hmm. Everybody knows that is what he does, and he does it well. And he doesn't get in his own way on defense. He has his principles, he has his tenets, and what it comes down to is, can the players execute? And what we saw last week, led by star linebacker Demario Davis, for those unfamiliar, number 56, you'll see him right in the middle of that defense. Demario Davis in the first 11 snaps of that game had 4 tackles. 3 of them were solo. He had a tackle for a loss, a QB hit, and a sack. The first 11 defensive snaps, 2 possessions.
That's crazy.
That'll set a tone for you, right? And so, to say the least. And so I think that's what you're looking for. Dennis Allen gave all of I think it was the defensive players, but it might have been more than that, but I'm pretty sure it was just the defensive players, left gas cans at their locker rooms. An old Sean Payton tactic to let them know, let me find out what's left in the tank here. Mm-hmm. And the Saints showed up and they responded to that big time. The Saints, New Orleans, we love us some prop coaching. Okay. It works. Sean Payton left cheese on people's lockers saying, don't take the cheese. Yeah. He wheeled in. I think there was one time to where like the playoff check or whatever that players get, he wheeled in that amount of money in like $1 bills to let everybody know, like, this is what you're playing for this week. Like, we love some prop coaching. And it worked. It worked again. And so for me, that's what this all comes down to is, can you continue to motivate those guys?
Yeah, you got a big stack of money in front of you. I think everybody's going to get pretty fired up. Even if it is ones, it all spends the same.
Jeez,
I think
dude, I'll suit up.
Yeah, no doubt. It's funny. You're talking about, the opening sequence that Davis had. Here's why the Rams have been really good over the last 4 or 5 weeks. Mm-hmm. Matthew Stafford has been upright and he's been healthy and he has just enough time, right? Yeah. It's not the greatest offensive line in the world, but it's good enough. And they've got a running game. And if you give Matthew Stafford time, if you give him the ability to take a look at what you're doing and he's not running for his life, he is still one of the best in the business. I know he's not going to get MVP votes. He shouldn't get MVP votes. That's not, but when it comes to whether or not this Rams team works, it's about number 9. Full stop, because he can still make crazy throws. We talked about this on the Tuesday Locked On Rams episode, that he's almost in that perfect little sweet spot where his physical skills are still at an incredibly high level. He can still make every throw on the field, but he has the IQ that is a master class. There's zero fear. And the one thing he's added to his resume over the last couple of years is he's a big-time playoff experienced player now. There's no more of the can he, will he, what happens if. Well, he just won the damn Super Bowl with a no-look throw in the middle. Right. It's like, he's good. Like, there's nothing you're going to throw at him that he hadn't seen. The only thing that he struggles with, like every quarterback that's ever put on a helmet, is trouble, right? I don't have time. And if he doesn't have time, he's like everybody else. If he has time, he's going to dice you up. And that's what he's been doing the last 3 or 4 weeks. Yeah,
I saw he dusted off one of those little no-look passes against the Commanders last week. That was sweet, man. That was something else. And look, what you're talking about with having kind of like the physical ability still at a high level, but having the experience and the mental acuity, the football IQ that comes with having seen as much as he's seen, those are the things that people are still waiting to kind of see on a consistent basis from Derek Carr here in New Orleans. Because he's got the physical ability. He can still make the throws, all those things. He's still a pretty good decision maker and everything too. He doesn't put the ball in harm's way very often, but he doesn't take a lot of risk either. And so those two things kind of go hand in hand. Correlation, causation, conversation can be had there, but you get what I'm saying. So the next thing is, can you see him elevate the other players around him, which we do get to see from Matthew Stafford? That's what everybody's still trying to figure out from Derek Carr. First year, can you do it? Can you not? Is kind of a wash. But as things continue to move forward, that's going to be a big thing. And of course, playoff experience is something that Derek Carr doesn't yet have, but the Saints trying to get him there. And it starts this Thursday with this game between the Saints and the Rams. Coming up, let's take a look at what it is that these two teams need to do to get a win. Is this going to be a game to remember, or another game to forget for one of these teams. We're going to be breaking it all down as we continue on with today's episode. Locked on Rams, Locked on Saints, your crossover Thursday here on the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's crossover Thursday brought to you by our friends over at DoorDash. Listen, Travis, I was hungry. All right. So I ordered some DoorDash. I got it here. This is I'm a big freak for Jamaican food and Caribbean food.
Sure.
Love it. Queen Trinilisa, a little local spot here. There was a fantastic place, the original Cully's over in Sherman Oaks when I used to stay in LA. You know what I'm talking about? That I used to order from all the time. DoorDash there, DoorDash here. I am DoorDash everywhere. I absolutely love it. And Travis, I know you love you some DoorDash too. We were talking about it before the show. Us going through all of our stuff here, using our bags. I absolutely love it. So we highly recommend that if you have not tried DoorDash yet, that you fix it. Right? Just fix it. Just go use DoorDash and we're going to help you out. You're going to get 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and enter the promo code LOCKED23. Subject to change, terms apply. That's 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first DoorDash order, entering that promo code in the DoorDash app, LOCKED23. Once again, subject to change, terms apply. Go and check them out today. Our friends at DoorDash. All right, y'all, wrapping up this crossover Thursday edition of Locked on Rams and Locked on Saints. Make sure you come back. You know, we're going to have another episode for you tomorrow on Friday, breaking down the recap of this game, making sure you got everything that you need to know, however this one goes. And this is going to be my big question for this. We thought that this was going to be a game to forget early on in the season, potentially. Now it's turning into a game to remember. So for the Rams, what is it that they need to do to make sure that that memory is sweet? What do they got to do to get a win?
Well, this is the biggest cliche in the world, but it also happens to be true. Don't turn the ball over, and I think they win the game. The only reason that they didn't beat the Commanders by 4 touchdowns is because Kiron Williams kept putting the ball on the ground. I think towards the end of the game, they started making some business decisions that the game was kind of in their back pocket, and whether they were going to cover or not was really the only thing that was left to be determined. So they started to kind of keep their powder dry towards the end of that game. But they're firing on all cylinders. But you saw it against the Commanders. They were in the red zone once. Kyren Williams pops it up. They get the ball back towards the end of the first half. They're getting ready to go in there and score again. He pops it up a second time. You can do that against the Commanders because the Commanders stink. You can't do that. Good team, right? You can't do it against a team that's also trying to win their division, that's also trying to stay into an NFC wildcard position, and the team they're chasing is the team that they're playing. The Saints, I think, have a little bit, if we're kind of doing like the whole want to calculus. I think the Saints want to is maybe slightly lower simply because they have 2 paths in. The division. Rams aren't going to win the division. Niners are going to win the division. This is their only road in. And
good point.
The math says right now the Rams are about a 50-50 shot. It's 52%, right? Win on Thursday goes up to 76%. Lose on Thursday, it goes down to 14%. This is their season. This is everything that they fought back to get to, that they earned themselves an opportunity to play in another big game coming up on Thursday night. And if they play clean, I think they win. It's the oldest football cliche in the world, but if they don't hand it over, I think they win the game.
Oh, it's really good. I'm interested in the calculus of want, where the Saints spoiling an opportunity for the Rams to play in a big game factors in. Feels like there's something that might reference. I don't know. Maybe
comes around, goes around.
Time is a cyclical thing, like blah blah blah. No, absolutely though. I think you're right there. I mean, that's huge. And it's cliche because it applies so often, right? Like it's not cliche because it doesn't have value. And I think that, like, I have my own cliches in terms of how the Saints can win too, because there's literally a formula for how the Saints win. Scoring off of turnovers, 6-0. Not scoring off of turnovers, 1-7. That's one of them. The other one is that in their 7 games that they've won, 24 sacks. In their 7 games that they've lost, 6. Get to the quarterback, turn the ball over, cash in. That's what the New Orleans Saints have to do. Now, that's really simple for me to say, a lot harder for those guys to go out there and do and execute. But you'll notice that a lot of that, again, comes down to that defense. It goes back to Dennis Allen and to his defense. Demario Davis, the veterans like Tyrann Mathieu. Watch out for the young guy in Zach Bond, who's finally getting opportunities to rush the passer like he did in college. The guy had 12.5 sacks in college. The Saints drafted him and said, you'll be a good off-ball linebacker. Sure. Now, all of a sudden, he's getting the opportunity to rush the passer more than he ever has in his career, and he's making good on it. So I think that like those are the things that you're going to be looking for from the Saints is can they apply the pressure? 25 pressures against the Giants last week, 24 against the Carolina Panthers before that. But the Rams offensive line, significantly better than the Giants offensive line and the Panthers offensive line. I know it's not one of the best in the NFL or anything, but you can't expect to maintain that exact pace. But can you get there when it matters? Third downs, late in the game, and have an impact. I think those are going to be the things that the Saints are going to have to do if they want to get a win this week.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly important. And I'll throw one more thing that kind of, you're talking about your defense, Ross, the Saints defense, this kind of putting everything we've talked about together is the Rams in the red area with the Saints defense equals potential field goal attempts, right? The Rams kicking game is a mess.
Interesting.
It is the one thing that they have not been able to figure out all season long. Matt Gay leaves in free agency. Remember the Rams in the offseason, they didn't sign anybody. Anybody that got an offer somewhere else, they were gone, right? Jalen Ramsey gone, Bobby Wagner gone, A'Shawn Robinson gone. Everybody, Matt Gay gone, everybody gone. They bring in Brett Maher, who we saw at the end of the year. It was a meltdown. It wasn't any better for the Rams either. They get rid of him after about a month or so. They bring in a guy that had never kicked in the NFL in Lucas Haversick, who's been on his best day average, and he hasn't had a lot of best days. They bring in Mason Crosby 2 weeks ago to push this kid in practice. Turns out Haversick has a pretty good day against Baltimore. They get rid of Crosby. Haversick goes out there last week against Commanders, misses a 43-yard field goal. And here is my nightmare scenario. The Rams do everything right to beat New Orleans. They do everything right to beat the New York Giants. And it comes down to somebody needs to make a 38, 39, 40-yard field goal, which is, in the NFL, it's a layup. You have to make it. And he can't. That's the thing that I keep waiting because every kick that is put down and sent up, you don't know what's going to happen. So good defense, trouble in the red area, bad kicking game could be a problem for the Rams.
Boy, okay. Definitely something to watch late in the game. If the Saints have like a, 23-20 lead or something like that, or a 21-20 situation, and the Rams are doing everything right, is that kicker able to overcome sort of some of that sloppiness? That's going to be big. And look, the Saints have dealt with a little bit of that too. They got a rookie kicker and not Blake Gillikin. Blake Gillikin was the former punter, but Blake Grupe came in. This is a guy that, was like 5'7", 160 pounds, and drilled a 50-yard field goal. It looked like it would have been good from 82 last week. Like he's got a leg on him, but he's been a little bit shaky this year. He's a guy that security during the preseason games almost didn't let in because they were like, you're not a player. It was wild, man. It was wild. But they've had a little bit of that too. So special teams on both of these sides, everything from starting field position for both of these teams, as well as, of course, those field goals, early or late, could have a big time impact. Travis, if you're willing to do a prediction for this game, 4.5-point favorites, the Rams, where do you think that this game ends up?
I think the Rams are going to win for two reasons. Number one, the Rams offense has been really good for the last 5 weeks or so. Yeah. The one game that they lost was against Baltimore, and they had a really good chance to beat one of the best teams in the NFL. They made, again, a special team snafu, punt return gets returned in overtime for a touchdown. They end up losing that game. But they moved the ball against Baltimore. They moved the ball, scored 37 points against the Cleveland Browns, one of the best defenses in the entire league. Their offense works. If their defense is good enough, I think that the Rams win that game. I think that they're playing their best football of the year at the right time of the year. They're at home. It's a short week, which benefits the home team a little bit because you have one less day where, the Saints obviously have to travel. Yeah. So I think the Rams are going to win. I think if they get over 30, they cover that 4.5 that we're talking about. So I'll put it at a 31-24 situation.
There you go. I'm actually taking the Rams in this one too. I took the Rams when the schedule release came out. It's a rough stretch to come out and then have to go and home teams on Thursday night have the advantage. Like right now in terms of what the results over the season have been so far. I think that trend will continue. But I do think that even with the loss, and what we know is that the Saints can actually outlive a loss in this game because of how bad the NFC South is. And so they would have still an opportunity. So I do think that this is not a game to where the Saints show up and get embarrassed. I do think that this is a game to where they show up and still show something good. No moral victories, though. I'm going to take the Rams in this one, but I'm waiting to be pleasantly surprised when it comes to this, because I do think that this Saints team is different than they were early on in the season. But this is a big time prove it game for them. So before I'm willing to pick them, let me see the prove it. So I'll take the. I think I was going with the Rams in this one, 27-24. I was taking the Saints to cover, but for the Rams to walk away with the win. Travis, absolute pleasure, dude. Always awesome to chop it up with you. We get into the numbers, we get into the vibes, and that's what I love. I love the vibes, man. Always a pleasure, dude. So for more on this matchup, and of course the recaps for this matchup, make sure you're checking out Locked On Rams and Locked On Saints on Friday morning. We'll have everything that you need from this big time game. And of course, as always, we appreciate you very much making Locked On Rams, Locked On Saints a part of your day, and of course your first listen of the day to you everydayers out there. Thank you very much, and we'll see you again here soon. Locked On Rams, Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.